Have you ever been in a conversation and you notice something? A flicker of discomfort on someone's face, a strange tension in the room, a detail in a story that just didn't add up and nobody else caught it? You didn't say anything. Maybe you second-guessed yourself. Maybe you thought, am I reading too much into this? And then 3 weeks later, everything you silently picked up on turned out to be true. You saw it. Nobody else did. That's not luck. That's not paranoia. That's a specific kind of psychological wiring. And today we're going to go deep into what it actually is, where it comes from, and why it can feel like both a superpower and an exhausting curse. Let's start with something most people get completely wrong. We tend to think that perception is universal, that we all basically see the same world and just interpret it differently. But that's not what neuroscience tells us. Your brain doesn't passively record reality like a camera. It actively constructs it. It's constantly filtering, predicting, and filling in gaps based on what it expects to see, which means two people standing in the exact same room, having the exact same conversation, are literally experiencing two different realities. And some brains are built to catch what most other brains quietly delete. Psychologists call this heightened perceptual sensitivity, and here's where it gets fascinating. Research on a trait called sensory processing sensitivity, first mapped out by psychologist Elaine Aron in the 1990s, suggests that roughly 15 to 20% of people have a nervous system that processes incoming information more deeply than average. Not more intensely in an overwhelming way, though that can happen too, but more thoroughly, more layers, more connections drawn, more emotional and sensory data absorbed per second than most people's brains bother to retain. Think of it this way. Most brains run a kind of efficient highway system. Information comes in, gets processed at speed, irrelevant details get discarded, keep moving. But some brains run every piece of incoming data through a much slower, much more intricate network of side roads. They notice the side road, the detour, the small sign everyone else drove past at 80 miles per hour. And because they notice it, they can't unnotice it. This is why these people often feel subtly out of step with the world around them. They walk into a room and feel the emotional weather before anyone said a word. They read a sentence and sense something unspoken underneath it. They watch someone smile and register almost involuntarily that the smile doesn't quite reach the eyes. And the strange thing is, they often don't know how to explain what they're picking up on because the signal arrives before the language to describe it does. Here's a real-world example. Imagine you're at a dinner party. Someone tells a story about their week, laughing as they tell it. Everyone else laughs along. But you feel this quiet pull of something, not sadness exactly, more like a shadow behind the story. You don't say anything. Later, that person quietly confides they've been going through something really hard. You weren't surprised. You already knew. You just didn't trust yourself enough to name it. That gap between what you perceive and what you feel permitted to say is one of the most quietly painful experiences these people carry. And it comes with a fascinating cognitive signature. Studies in social neuroscience show that people with heightened perceptual awareness tend to have stronger activation in brain regions connected to what's called mirror neuron processing, the neural machinery that lets us simulate other people's internal states. Their brains are essentially running more frequent, more detailed simulations of other people's experiences. They're not just watching you, they're modeling you, almost automatically, which is why they know what you're feeling before you've processed it yourself. But here's the part nobody talks about enough. This kind of perception doesn't just apply to other people. It applies to ideas, systems, and patterns too. Some of the most quietly influential thinkers, artists, and innovators in history weren't necessarily the loudest voices in the room. They were the ones who sat slightly apart and noticed what wasn't being said. Charles Darwin spent years carefully observing what everyone else walked past every day. He saw variation, he saw pattern, he saw consequence in details that seemed trivial, not because he had access to different data, but because his mind refused to let certain details unremarked. There's a concept in psychology called apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between seemingly unrelated things. In its extreme form, it can become a problem, but in moderated form, it's the engine behind creative insight, pattern recognition, and what we often lazily call intuition. The people who see what others don't aren't making things up. They're making connections faster, deeper, and more involuntarily than others do. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, because this wouldn't be fair without it. This kind of perception comes with weight.
People who process deeply often absorb deeply too. Other people's stress, ambient tension, the emotional residue of a difficult conversation. They leave crowded environments feeling inexplicably drained. They need more recovery time after intense social situations. They're sometimes told they're too sensitive, too intense, too much, which is a genuinely painful thing to hear when sensitivity is simply the operating system you were born with, not a character flaw you chose. And they struggle with doubt, because when you see something others don't, the social pressure to doubt yourself is enormous. The room isn't acting like anything's wrong, so maybe you're imagining it. The majority feels like evidence, but perception isn't a democracy. Just because 9 people didn't notice something doesn't mean the 10th person who did is wrong. So what do you do with all of this? Here's the reframe I want to leave you with. The thing that has probably made you feel strange, overly analytical, or socially out of tune your whole life, that restless noticing, that quiet accumulation of details, that inability to accept the surface of things as the whole story, that's not a malfunction, it's a calibration, a different, arguably richer interface with reality. The world genuinely needs people who catch what falls through the cracks, who ask the question nobody thought to ask, who hold space for what isn't being said. The real work isn't learning to see less, it's learning to trust what you see more. So here's what I want you to sit with today. Think of one moment where you quietly noticed something true, something real, before anyone else acknowledged it. And instead of asking yourself why you're so different, ask yourself what you might be for. If this landed somewhere in you, drop a comment. Tell me what you noticed that others seem to miss. I genuinely read them. And if you want more of this kind of psychology, you know what to do. I'll see you in the next one.